Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast. I'm your host, Jeff, and with me, as always, is Mona. Unfortunately, this week, Alan is on assignment. We are post-evangelical ministers and theological thinkers grappling with our place in the progressive Christian world. Thank you for joining us for another conversation on faith and culture. This week, because we're down a man in the podcast studio today, we are bringing in a couple guests that Mona has graciously brought to the table. And more on why that is a funny pun in a second, I guess.
I was just going to say, good one for the segue. So one of my really good friends, Christy, who I know from school, from seminary, and we also do social dancing together. Christy attends a church called Simple Church, and it is a dinner farm-to-table church, which we'll hear more about it in a moment. So I'd like to say, hi, Christy. How are you? Welcome.
Hey, Mona. I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to have you on. And you have brought with you a guest, Zach. Hi, Zach. How's it going?
Hi, Mona. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Zach is the pastor of Simple Church. So the two guests we have today are both the members of this church or you know what? Let's just let you guys take it away and tell us your relationship to the community.
All right, Christy, go first.
So I discovered Simple Church about a year ago, actually a little bit more than a year ago. I was looking for a different type of community that was a little bit less stuffy, if I can be completely honest. I was looking for a way to build community. I'd been in my first year of seminary and realized, wow, that's definitely something that I'm missing. So I took a leap. I looked on the website and we had there was a number at the bottom of the website that said, call and we'll save you a place at the table. So I called Zach and I was super nervous. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not usually a person who will just go and call and, do something crazy by myself. That has since changed, which is exciting. But I took the leap. I joined this new community and I have fallen head over heels with its model, with the people, with the things that we do that really engage the community around us. And it's been a wonderful friendship with Zach as well. We now work together. I'm one of the interns at Simple Church, and I'm sort of wrapping that into my seminary experience as well. So,
yeah, it's funny. I remember that first phone call because that was the time when we were still like hurting for members. Like we had just gotten started, and so I was like, every day I was like praying. I was like, please let someone come to church tonight. Someone new. Let someone come find their way to church. And so I get a call from Christy and I pick up and she goes, hi, is this Simple Church? And I'm like, yeah, it is. And she goes, I'm calling to RSVP. Is it too late to RSVP? And I was like, no, come to church, please get to church. Yeah. So that was really funny.
So Zach, what's your background?
Yeah. All right. So I am a recovering evangelical from Texas and happens to be kind of a lonely liberal in Texas. Decided to go to the most liberal divinity school that I could possibly go to. So I moved up to New England to go to Harvard Divinity School and went there for 3 magical years. I would have stayed forever, but they made me graduate. So I, like everyone, was like struggling to decide what to do after seminary, and was serving a small little quarter-time Methodist church in Brighton, Massachusetts, and we had 6 members, and each of them sat in their own pew. And
oh boy,
felt like a failure. And the church, like I tried my darndest to grow it and I couldn't do it. And it was in Brighton, which if you don't know is like one of the most densely populated places in the world. Like 1 million people between 18 and 25 within 3 miles of my church that I was serving. And I like could not get it to grow. And it was like driving me crazy. And people would walk in and they'd see the 6 people sitting in their own pews. And it smelled like death, and they, like did not want to come back. I could see it in their face, like in the very beginning. And so I was kind of like grappling with that, wondering if I even wanted to like stay in the ministry, trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And then I got a call from the Methodists in New England, and they asked if I wanted to start a church from scratch in Grafton. Long story short, the North Grafton Church went through a very similar thing to the Brighton Church, where they just dwindled down to 5 or 6 people. But they had the foresight to say that instead of just like last one out, shut the door, they were going to close the building into the church and sell the building and set aside the money from the building sale to start a new community. And so they retained their parsonage, which is on 5 acres of farmland and is directly next door to an organic farm. And they kept that empty for a year and a half until I came. And then they gave us $250,000 to start the church from the very beginning.
Holy smokes.
Wow.
Wait, okay, can you back up for just a sec? They just called you out of the blue and were like, hey, will you start this farm church?
Yes. Well, see, so they didn't even give me that much. In retrospect, giving a 25-year-old like $250,000 with no track record is probably pretty like fiscally irresponsible. So I'm really glad that they took a huge gamble on me, because I had no proof that I could actually do anything with that investment. And I asked them like what they wanted me to do and like what I had to do. You know, I said, like, do we have to meet on Sunday? They said, no. I was like, great. I said, do we have to have a church building? They said, no. I was like, great. I was like, do we have to have Sunday school? They're like, no. I was like, great. And I was like, what do I have to do? And they're like, make disciples. And I was like, okay.
Whoa.
I think I know what that means. And so the more I thought about it, I was like, if we make disciples, that means like following after the example of Jesus. A lot of times people talk about making disciples are talking about Sunday school or like Christian education in some way. But
Yeah.
I think like if we actually model our lives after the way that Jesus did, Jesus didn't build a building and then invite people to come and hear him give speeches. You know, he went out doors and he preached where people were and he healed them and he fed them. I was like, that's what I want to do. While at Harvard Divinity School, we had these Thursday night potlucks. We would like slam into each other's apartments. There'd be like 40 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment, which is like fire code out the wazoo, I realize now. But, and we would drink cheap wine and argue about theology until 2 a.m. And I would never be able to sleep on Thursday nights because I was so jazzed by that and those conversations. And we would disagree just like so passionately. And it was great. Church didn't make me feel like that at all, ever. So when they gave me such a like wide breadth, I decided that we would focus on keeping it as simple as possible, never having a building that we were like weighed down by or had to find a way to afford. Like, if we're being honest, most little churches in New England are not, St. Peter's Cathedral. They're not. I think we put a lot of like undue attention and money into our buildings. Jesus says, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And I think that right now our treasure is in our buildings. And so I decided I didn't want to have a building. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. And I wanted it to be on Thursday night. And I wanted it to be around a shared meal and conversations and dialogue. And I would call it Simple Church. And so it kind of like came to me like pretty immediately when they offered me the job. And it's pretty much stayed exactly like I thought it was going to, with very few exceptions.
You are blowing my mind right now.
It's really great.
He's deconstructed like everything that most people know of this experience and institution. He took it all apart.
I think like if you go back and read Acts, like the way the early church is described, it's like they met in each other's homes over the prayers and the breaking of bread, and they had the goodwill of all people, and God added to their number daily. And that sounds pretty good to me. Like, you don't have to worry about how you're going to heat. You don't have to worry about how you're going to, patch the roof or fix the steeple, but, you can really focus on people. And, like our roots are in Methodism, and the Methodist church in the beginning was, operated on a shoestring. I think if John Wesley saw the church buildings that we have now and the way that we spend our money now, he would flip over in his grave.
So this question is for both of you. With such a unique church model like that, like on the leadership end, what were some of the challenges making it happen and making it work? And what roadblocks did you run in towards the beginning in trying to fight that tendency to kind of go with what we always know church to be? And then as an attender, Christy, like what was refreshing and what stood out about it, and what did you miss from other church contexts, or if anything, as you kind of journeyed with this new community?
I'll go for it, Christy. You go first.
Okay. I would say that I think it's a really beautiful thing to sit around a table. It's very centering to sit across from one another and actually to construct the sermon together. So I think what might be helpful, Zach, is if you sort of describe what our night looks like.
Yeah.
And facility wise as well, we actually rent from a local church. So we don't own the building, but we do rent their space. And that provides extra income for the church, and it helps us to operate simply. So Zach, if you want to sort of explain our model on Thursday nights.
Yeah, so I think I might go farther than just starting on Thursday night. So
yeah, absolutely.
What we do is we meet for this shared Eucharistic meal on Thursday nights. And the rest of the worship life of the church is built around work. And so the two main elements of work that we do, like prayerful work, are farming and baking. And so the church parsonage is the farmhouse on an organic farm that is like a fully functioning organic farm that functions completely outside of us. And they would be fine without our help, but I'd like to think we contribute to their workload. And so on a typical week, we'll meet together as a staff on Thursday morning, and we'll meet at my house for breakfast at about 9:00. And then we'll pray the Book of Common Prayer together, pray for the church at each individual member of the church we'll pray for over breakfast. And then we'll go and work on the farm from 10:30 to noon. And then we'll come back together for prayer and lunch. And then we'll break for a little bit, rest, shower up after getting all dirty on the farm, and then come back to bake bread and make the food for church together. Bread making is really important. I'll get into that a little bit more, I'm sure, in a minute. Because the Eucharist is our kind of central liturgical metaphor, the fact that we make the bread together, I think, is really important. And it has become extremely important. And you can see pictures of the bread on our Instagram or Facebook if you check us out online. But the worship life starts around 6:30. People will roll in starting at 6, and then we'll gather together. And once everybody's there, we'll gather in a circle around the table, and we'll break bread, and we'll pass it to one another. And we recognize that we're one in the body of Christ. In the same way that bread starts out as many parts that come together as one loaf, the flour, the water, the salt, those come together and almost magically become one loaf of bread. And in the same way, we're many around the table, we become one in the body of Christ in communion with one another. That's what the whole service is about, is recognizing that Eucharist, that being thankful for the unity that we all share. And so we break the bread and we pass it to one another. We pray, we sing some songs, we serve each other food, we sit down, we read a little bit from the Bible, and then I give a little tiny 4 to 6 minute sermon. But that sermon is just a starter. It's not the sermon. It's just something for people to chew on. Then we have conversations for 30 minutes at the tables. And that's what I really consider the proclamation of the word, is that dialogue, that give and take between people. So I really consider my sermon to be more like yeast in the bread. If it does its job a little bit, it goes a long way, and it breathes life into the conversation. But nobody would ever point to yeast and say, hey, that's bread, right? The real bread is the conversations that we have for those 20 or 30 minutes. And then we sing some songs. A lot of them are songs that we've written. We try not to have any paper, because so many churches, one of the great unspoken sins of the church is that we print hundreds of pounds, thousands, hundreds of millions of pounds of paper a year as a church, in bulletins that we just throw away. And everybody knows what's up. Everybody knows what's coming. Why are we going to print out, who the choir director is? Go up and ask the choir director her name, right? So we don't print anything, nothing to throw away at the end of the night. We use glassware and napkins. right? If we're doing our job, we will not have anything to throw away at the end of the night. If we have food scraps, we give it to our chickens, right? So we have written songs that are like call and response hymns. And then we sing a lot of like spirituals that people know and they don't need to read from a piece of paper. And then to end it all out, we do the last half of the communion ritual, which is juice. And it's the cup that represents the forgiveness of Christ. And we usually end it with an altar call, in a call throwback to my Texas evangelical upbringing.
Nice.
I think like church without an altar call always feels a little weird to me. And I know that like liberals up north are a little allergic.
Yeah, what does that look like to you guys? I'm trying to picture that.
So we don't have an altar to call people to, but I invite people every week to kneel at the altar of their heart and recommit themselves to following after the gospel, and invite them into the community if they're new, and say that if they're seeking the Christian life, that we're there for them and there for them to ask questions if they need help along the way. Christy, I don't know, maybe you want to throw in about what the altar call looks like?
Yeah, I think one of the key elements of the altar call is also an opportunity to serve. Church doesn't happen with just Zach, and it doesn't happen with just me or the interns or any other staff member. Like, we have to work together as a community. And so one of the things, we pass around a jar as an offering. If people are able, that's awesome. Oftentimes too, we'll also have extra eggs left over from the farm. So as an offering to pick up some eggs, you can drop some money into the jar. But I think too, we offer opportunities for people to clean up and really be a part of that kitchen, that after meal Thanksgiving sort of feeling of, I'm in the kitchen with my mom drying dishes after Thanksgiving, or, I'm putting stuff away with my dad. We break down tables, we sweep everything. And especially since it's rented space, we really have to take care of it. And I think that together as a community, we do that very well.
I didn't think about how that cleanup or that caretaking aspect would build a sense of family, but it makes total sense to me.
I think I also realized that I never answered Jeff's question, so I'm going to circle back in a minute. But I'm from Texas, so I could talk to anybody all day about anything. So if I'm rambling too much, I hope you edit me.
Oh, you're doing great. No, this is fantastic. Keep going.
I think there's a general rule of community building that says you're not a member of a community until you have a job. And once you have a job, that's when you're part of the group. I think like the fancy highfalutin seminary word you use would be like the theory of community reciprocity. When you have responsibility and you're trusted to do a task, that's when you're part of a community. And so I take seriously that and invite people to come early and help set up, invite people to stay really late and help clean up, because it takes a long time. And that's the other thing too, is like church like this, like takes a long time. If someone comes to help with soup at like 5, and then they stay until the last candle's put away and the last section of floor is swept and the last dish is dried and put away, they're there for 4 hours. That's not a small thing to ask people to do. The tendency with like kind of our seeker sensitive like approach to Christianity is to like ask as little of people as possible. But I think like people are actually looking for something they can give their entire lives to. And so we shouldn't shy away from like asking people to give generously of their time and their energy, and, give them something they believe in, and they'll constantly shock you with how much they'll give.
That's very countercultural, it seems like, for most.
Yeah. Don't just stay for an hour and then go back and watch the TV.
This isn't a consumer experience. Yeah. You're going to freaking belong.
And I'll throw you shade if you like leave right after dinner without clean.
Well, a sense of being needed is so good. And I think, we live in a culture that's plagued by loneliness and plagued by, all kinds of depression and feelings of isolation. There have been so many studies that have come out recently about this. So to go to a place where it's like, if you're not there, people are going to notice and miss you, and you're needed. Like that's a really crucial human feeling that we all need to experience.
And I think a lot of people with church feel as though in order to help out, they need to have like a specialized skill, because we highlight music and teaching and preaching and all these things that a lot of people feel like they're unqualified for. So I think maybe It's more of people will definitely want to do that, but there's never a lot of opportunities within a traditional church structure to allow people to feel like they can use what they view as perhaps like a mundane gift, but that is actually super important for the community.
Everybody can dry a dish with few exceptions.
Everyone can feed the chickens.
Everybody can like throw slop to the chickens.
I would also add that this is one of my favorite parts of Simple Church. Everybody is needed, and every voice deserves to be heard and valued and loved. And I think, when we talk through the little bit of yeast that Zach gives us at the beginning of the night, it becomes more and more evident that a lot of people in the church have very, very different views from one another. We are an incredibly theological diverse community for the size that we are. And I think one of the most valuable things is that, okay, we may know that within our traditional mainline churches that there are differing views even within a single community, but we don't get a chance to ever talk it out. And I think that giving people the time and the space and a meal in front of them really opens up opportunities for this amazing dialogue and really truly understanding each other's languages. And I think that's certainly one of my favorite parts of Simple Church and why I'm so drawn to it. So everybody is needed, everybody has a job, and everyone is valued. It's a really, really beautiful thing.
That sounds incredible. And it also sounds like it wouldn't really be the same without the farm and the baking aspect like that. That's really irreplaceable in what you guys are doing. Would you say that's right?
Yeah. And I think I realized I haven't talked much about the bakery at this point. So let me walk it back a little bit and talk about the bakery a little bit. We are small. And right now we are in our last year of seed funding. And I kind of just had this realization that, we're about 60 people, and 60 people by passing the plate are not able to cover the cost of the full operating budget of a church. Even one that's as bare bones and shoestring as ours. It's a lot of money to run a church. And so I was starting to think I felt a lot of pressure to grow very quickly, very soon, because, if we had 200 people, it'd be much easier to fundraise, I guess, to pay for the church. But there's kind of this starvation mentality, every year around towards the end of fiscal year, where we have a stewardship Sunday and someone stands up and talks about how, little giving had happened in the last year and how people really need to step up. There's lots of guilt around that time of year. And it's a shame. I do a lot of guest preaching at churches on Sundays since we meet on Thursdays. And I visit, and a lot of times I'll sign the, visit log. And on Easter, I'll get 4, giving requests, just random, from churches, who are basically treating Easter as their main fundraising time, because that's the time they get the most butts in the pews.
Oh, yeah.
That makes me feel gross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I talk to a lot of people who aren't churched, especially if I'm out in the community, farmers markets and stuff. And a lot of the most common critiques of the church that I hear is that the church is just after people's money. And I don't think that that's intentionally true in most contexts. But, if we're spending all of our money on these huge creaky old buildings that nobody actually really likes and that we can't really actually afford, and we're hitting up total strangers for just, sending us a check to help us pay for the big creaky buildings, I think people's bullshit detectors are really finely tuned, and they know that, where our money is being spent. And so I think there's a lack of transparency in the way that churches raise money. And I think that there's this tendency to, bleed communities dry just to keep things going, or to grow so big that nobody even knows who you are because the church is so enormous to pay for it. And so we started making bread, and bread became very important to us because of the Eucharist. And people kind of jokingly said, why don't we sell this? I didn't know what went into it. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know what kind of permitting you needed. It was really big and daunting and scary. Over time, I realized there was some wisdom in like the monastic traditions of, monks who will make beer or monks who will make jam and have a needed craft and a trade that they can throw themselves into, provide like a food item or some sort of service to the community through their work. And so bread like became that for us. And we bake bread by hand and we sell it at farmers markets. And our goal is to get to the point where we are able to pay for the entire church through bread sales. And the way we're going to do that is we just raised a bunch of money to buy a wood-fired oven, and we hired a professional baker who also happens to be a theologian named Kendall Vanderslice. And she is awesome. She's an anthropologist. She's like a scientist. Look her up on our website. She's great. And her goal is to like make the bread a real legitimate business that will pay for the life of the church. And so hopefully next year we will be selling 300 loaves a week, and that will be enough to cover all of our church budget.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That's great. Yeah, we just had a conversation about 3 weeks ago on the show about like giving and where we manage that, and we were trying to come up with like ideas and how we thought churches could alleviate the idea of money as always being a part of a conversation, and that's brilliant.
It's the way to do it. And like you're saying, it's a really old model. It's not like
it's
recent.
old as the hills. And if you go to a monastery, if you give that monastery money, more likely than not, the monastery will give it to the poor. And the reason why is because monasteries are like self-sustaining cloistered communities, right? They are able to maintain their budget through their work, whether it's farming or baking or beer making or what. If you go to Kerzee, France, which is like so popular, everybody loves Kerzee. If you give Kerzee money, they give it to the poor because they make all the money they need by, making jam and bread and all kinds of things. What a like beautiful ministry of hospitality. So like I have this vision of like next year at Simple Church, if you put money in the offering plate, we will give it away because we won't need it. And we will give it to, help bring about the kingdom of God. And that for me is like a much more exciting model of like fundraising. And hopefully, so this year we ran a surplus, which is pretty like unheard of for church plants as young as we are. And it's because we're like generating income, and the money that we're raising above our budget, we can use to create new branches of the dinner church model in our area. So we can like bankroll new inventive ministries from our ministry and the surplus from our bread.
So is like doing other branches of the ministry? Is that also a way that you would combat growth? Because I'm assuming there's kind of a plateau where maybe this model wouldn't work with a certain amount of people.
Yeah, I mean, because like 60 people, like we'll average about 30 people a night for dinner on Thursdays, and that feels like just about as big as you can get, like for a dinner party. Like it stops being a dinner party and it starts being like like a sorority party or something. Like it starts being like almost like a kegger if you get more than like 50 people showing up. And so I think that like for us, like having multiple nights of worship and having multiple congregations under the same umbrella are in our future. And we actually just hired our church planting apprentice. His name's Lyanna. She's coming up from Texas, and she's going to work with us for a year. She'll farm and bake and dinner worship with us. And she'll also be fundraising and doing like area research to find where our second branch will be. And so she'll start our second branch, Simple Church 2, location TBD, with its own monastic funding model and its own like separate identity, but it'll still be dinner church and we'll be connected under the same farm.
Christy, did I hear you say that the bread making process takes, let me see if I remember this correctly, 18 hours?
Yeah. And I think, Zach, you sort of alluded to that, even just in your describing, if we have quick growth within the church, like super rapid fire growth, that's actually not helpful. And so when we look at the way that we make bread, most supermarkets use a crap ton of sugar and a whole lot of yeast to create this bread that we often eat every day. But with this particular model, we allow the bread to ferment. We don't use any sugar, and we use, what is it, Zach, like a teaspoon and a quarter?
It's actually
yeast.
it's only a quarter teaspoon, which is like
Oh, that's very little. Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
like
That's nothing.
half a penny.
And where does the flour come from?
The flour we use like the high quality like artisan bread flour, and then we use whole wheat grains to increase the health of it. A farm that people should look up is 4 Star Farms in Northfield, which is an awesome local grain provider that we have used in the past and we'll keep using.
Oh, so Christy, sorry, I interrupted you. We were talking about yeast and flour and...
Yeah. So we let this ferment. We use so little yeast and we use no sugar. And so what happens is that over these 12 to 18 hours, the yeast really begin to work on the flour mixture. And it's incredible. I mean, we baked bread this morning. And so to dump out those tubs, which Zach mixed up last night or sometime yesterday, we dumped it out this morning. And to see all of that growth in a longer period of time, I mean, most bread that you make only rises within an hour to 2 hours. But this is 12 to 18 hours. This is huge. This is so much longer. It's this incredible process of chemistry and science and a lot of faith, because today we woke up this morning and it was raining like crazy. And so the weather can have a huge effect on it. So we were like crossing our fingers and praying that, it didn't over ferment or it fermented just right. I think it turned out pretty well today. So it's always a wait and see sort of mentality.
But it sounds like not only the process, but the connection to the earth is really important to you guys. And this is maybe circling back to a bunch of things that have been said so far, but I'm picking up a theme here of being really conscious of your relationship to the earth, and Mark, that you're leaving, sourcing locally, being really, really connected to nature, which is it's unusual, I think, for most of us in modern life these days, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot about work, and like I think like ministers tend to be stressed out, overworked people who are pulled in a million different directions, and like ministers have a tendency to be like they can really ruin their marriages because of their ministry, and they work a million hours, and I was just looking at it, and it doesn't like seem like very like grounded. It used to be that about a third of the country were farmers. They would farm enough food for their families, and then maybe about 20 other people. Now most of us have jobs that don't have anything to do with like food production, right? And so like it's almost like we're working a million hours so that we could get money, so that we could pay for our house, pay for our food, buy our gym membership to stay healthy. But like farmers don't join gyms, right? They have this like holistic lifestyle where their like hands are in the dirt and they're using their bodies physically to plant plants that become like nutritious food they can use to feed their families and their communities. Like that type of work to me is just like so compelling. And like there's nothing more joyful in my life than like taking flour and water and salt and letting it ferment and like just like magically bringing it all together into this like beautiful, like nutritious bread, and then handing it to someone and knowing they're going to feed their family with it. That is like holy good work that I think a lot of us are missing out on, that like connection to food and that connection to other people. And like that's the type of work that I think that a lot of us are longing for. And I think there's like this general discontent with people about their jobs, but also about the food they're eating and like the lack of connection that we have. And also just like in farming, there is rest. Like you plant the plant in the ground, you do everything that you can, and then you wait. And with bread, like you mix it up, put it in the right place, and you like get it ready, but then you just let it sit and you let it rest. And like without that rest, like you can't have a good product. I think that's something that we're all missing in our lives, is that like that Sabbath. Like if your Sabbath is just like working yourself to the bone and then collapsing at the end of the day because you're so exhausted, and that's like not Sabbath. right? I think so many of us are longing for like a life of like balance and connection and feeding our souls and our bodies. And I think like in a lot of ways, like going back to like more simple rhythms of life, or what we could do to get back to that type of lifestyle.
I would say, yeah, that's actually one of the most beautiful reasons why I'm still connected to Simple Church. I mean, there's so many beautiful reasons, of course. But I've found that I'm so much more centered, and there is a specific rhythm to this lifestyle that I need. And I think a lot of us need that sort of groundedness and that rhythm. So I started attending Simple Church in April of 2015. And then by the summer, I was getting my hands in that dough. It was a really, really necessary thing for me to do. I lost one of my really good mentors and youth volunteers, one of my greatest friends, last summer, very, very suddenly. And for me to work with Simple Church and to be a part of that community in a very different way, I think changed a lot for the better. So I started working with the bread and started kneading it, and it became this incredible breath, this incredible rest work rhythm that altered everything for me. And I've told Zach this a lot as well, and I know that Zach like really facilitated that for me. Oftentimes I would come in the morning and just not speak and just work that bread, and in some way, shape, or form, like healing was occurring there, even though we didn't communicate verbally, and even though we were doing this beautiful work, but it was so prayerful, and it was really, really beautiful to have that in a really big time of need. And so I've continued. Of course, during the school year, it's a lot more difficult. I'm in my second year of seminary, so I didn't get as much time to work with Simple Church through the school year, but I'm back now, and it feels amazing.
Well,
that's such a great story.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Like a lot of times when we tend to talk about church, we're like, well, how are people affected by it? It always seems to be connected with some program or some message or something like that. And just something as simple as like kneading dough and coming back into the rhythm of life from a loss like that is really powerful.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And something about Sabbath and healing that you're both talking about is interesting to me. So I grew up as a minister's daughter, right? And it always struck me as quite odd that the whole church is taught to practice Sabbath on Sunday, but that's always a working day for ministers. So the people who are preaching Sabbath never really get a Sabbath. Honestly, most ministers don't really get a full day off, hardly ever.
Which is dumb. That's dumb.
It's terrible.
I take 2 very like boring days off every week, and it's awesome. If you're not taking 2 days off, you're wrong. Like, take 2 days off, y'all. People fought and died like for the 40-hour work week. Like they shed blood so you could have 2 days off every week. And if you like don't take it off, then you are like not living up to the full potential of the labor movement. Like take days, man.
That's compelling. And also, to be a healer, you also have to be whole yourself. Like you have to take care of yourself first.
Oh yeah.
Put on your own oxygen mask, and that's affected me a lot throughout my life, watching a lot of people I love in ministry just get burnt out and burned up by that. And so it's very refreshing to hear you both talk about the whole thing that you're doing. It's really amazing.
Yeah. And so self-care is such a buzzword in seminary right now.
Yeah, it is. Self-care.
I like hashtag self-care. Like I feel like I heard it like a million times, and I heard it from people who were like stressed out and working way too hard. And basically just like spinning their tires. And I feel like, a lot of times what they would say is like, I didn't do all my reading tonight, and I didn't write my paper, and I didn't do this, and I watched Netflix because self-care. And I was like, all right, well, if you're watching Netflix, you have to finish your work, right? Then you're not fully watching Netflix because you're stressing out about your work, and you're not doing your work because you're watching Netflix. And so you're not really like fully resting, and you're not fully working. So I'm much more compelled by the idea of like setting up a rhythm of your life where you work hard in the time that you work, but you don't work hard for the sake of working hard. and you get the work done that you need to get done. But then the days that you rest, you rest, man, and you're not like worried about all of that other stuff. You're able to turn it off for a little bit. I think that's something that a lot of us are missing.
And working with the material world, the bread, the chickens, the flour, you really, you kind of can't take that home mentally, I suppose.
No, yeah. And that's the other thing too. I think for pastors, especially, the worst thing that ever happened to the professional ministry was the professional ministry, where we like see the ministers as these like professional people who have to wear a suit and tie, and their job is to, read theological books and come up with a erudite sermon that will, sustain us through the entire week. And so like, it becomes like where if you give like a 20-minute sermon every week, how many hours a week are you spending writing that sermon? How much time could you be spent doing something else? Something that would, like, I think better serve your time. Like when we saw ministers as professionals whose like job it was just to write a speech, that like was a really bad turn. And I think I'm much more interested in like hearing what my community has to say, and like creating like spaces for like conversation is really important. And because my sermon is 5 minutes, I'm not spending like a million hours writing it. I have the freedom to do other things and meet people where they are in the community, and hopefully if everything goes well and we don't over ferment the bread, then like feed them like, delicious, nutritious, life-giving food.
I think that's totally right on. I mean, sometimes it feels as though the traditional church models don't even allow for the opportunity for that kind of Sabbath that you're talking about, where you have modes of rest and, yeah.
It's like, all of this sounds very foreign to my ears. Like, are you allowed to do this?
Yeah. Okay. Jeff asked me like 20 minutes ago, and I realized I still haven't answered this question. He asked about like pushback or blowback. And like, it's been pretty well non-existent. I mean, maybe after I do this, I'll get a million hate mails or something. But I think like most of my peers in ministry understand exactly what we're trying to do. Like it's simple and it's different, but it's not rocket science. We're throwing a dinner party every week. Like anybody could do this, but I think a lot of times they feel like constrained by their setting or their building or the way it's always been done. So they don't have the same kind of freedom to experiment that we have. But I think like generally people just like get what we're trying to do. I think like generally speaking, there's not been a lot of negative pushback for what we're doing. I think like a lot of people just understand it intuitively.
And I've also had friends who are definitely not churchgoers, who are actually very devout atheists, who have said, so wait, that's what you do in this particular model of church? I mean, that sounds like something that I would go to. So it's this amazing, beautiful, different thing that really has breathed life into our notion of church and my notion of church. I mean, you talked about getting rest, and I had to laugh a bit because right now I'm finishing up my 4th year in youth ministry, and I am leaving that particular profession and seeking to do a lot more things in a similar model to Simple Church. And so when you said, in traditional mainline churches, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for rest. The only room for rest that I get is after like youth lock-in nights or after youth retreats where I'm just dead and I come home and I pass out forever. So yeah, I definitely appreciate this sort of model. It's amazing. It's really been a healthy thing for me to get engaged in.
And I'm thinking about how many times I grew up doing all these programs and ministries at church and all these activities. How few times I just sit and like look in someone's eyes and talk to them. Oftentimes we're so busy doing stuff that we forget to be together. So that was going to be my next question for you guys is, and you kind of have alluded to this, but I'm trying to, parse out. So if you guys have the farm and you're doing the bakery and all this stuff, and that's so part of your community, how is it then that people could replicate what you guys are doing without those elements? Do you think that's possible? Like someone could, in the middle of the city who can't grow anything or doesn't really have a space to bake.
All right. So I'll say 2 things. I think like anybody can throw a dinner party, man. If you get 5 people around a table and you break bread together and you pray together, that's church. And it's not like church light. It's like, that's real church, like with no apologies, breaking bread with people prayerfully and having conversations that matter and singing and worshiping together. That's, anybody can do that right now. And you don't need seed money and you don't need a model of any kind. You just need to like go out, invite your friends around a table, and that's church. But I think like one of the things that I really love about our model is the way that like all these different like trades come together. Like farming is something that was never important to me until I started a food church, and like just like happened to be next door to like a working farm. And basically like the way we got started with the farm was I was talking to the farmer, and there's 30 acres of land that he was grazing on with his cattle around our 5 acres of land that the house sits on. And they were like going in a circle around it. And in the meantime, like our land was like way like overgrown and horrendous and full of poison ivy. And so I said to him, I was like, like if you want, you can just use our land for free. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah. And he was out there like the next morning at like 6 a.m. And so I went out there and helped him put out the fence, and the cows were like on the church property. And I thought that was just like really cool. And then I was like, I have some free time in the morning. I can come by and help out. And back then I didn't even have a church to like invite people to yet. So like, what was I supposed to be doing with my time? And so I just like started working on the farm almost because I didn't know what to do with myself. I was like dying with like, like so much free time. So started working on the farm like almost on accident. And then it became like theologically important later. Once I understood like the importance of like knowing where your food comes from. But yeah, I mean, there are often times that the farmer will call me, like I'm in the middle of something else, and we'll have to go and like wrangle the cows away. Get them back in greener pastures.
Do you use a lasso, or like how do you do it?
No, it's not nearly as attractive as that. It's much more getting behind them and praying they go where you want them to go, because they're big animals.
Clapping your hands and say, "Hey cow,
hey cow,
go over there."
Here, girl. Yeah, that's more less yeehaw, more please come here.
And Christy, you go help harvest too, right? And you guys help at the farm, you said?
Yeah. So that's typically on Thursday morning. So I'm sure that will expand at some point. So right now we're doing a lot of weeding, so much weeding, but it's amazing to look down the rows and actually see the sort of progress that's happening. And so we come back every week and we see that the kale is huge, and we see that the carrots have been planted, and we see like all of these amazing different types of plants that are just springing up, seemingly out of nowhere. And it's just this amazing, beautiful, even as menial as weeding sounds, it's so relaxing and it's so beautiful, just to pull at the earth and create a nurturing environment.
Do you find that you get a lot of participation from people that are also attending like the service or the meals? Like, is it a pretty large percentage of people that kind of feel like they want to be involved in the farm work as well?
I think a lot of our...
Sorry,
I was going to say, no, a lot of our members have families, which makes it kind of complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Or
jobs.
Or jobs. I mean, we work during the day, during the mornings, during the week. So it makes things a little bit complicated, but we definitely have some devoted drop-ins that really do help from time to time. And actually our volunteer team is huge.
People will come and help mix the dough. They'll come and help sell the bread at farmers markets. They'll come and help us wash dishes, which is like a bear of a job. Scraping dough off, mixing bowls is not anyone's favorite job, but someone's got to do it. And we have lots of help with things like that, as people can.
And what's you said you had a lot of families. Is it a pretty diverse group of people that attend the meals as far as like age and economic status and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, age-wise, we were very diverse. Our youngest person that comes is 5 now. And our oldest person just moved. She just moved. Shirley moved to California, and she was in her early 90s.
Oh, wow.
And I think like with church plants, there's lots of tendency to kind of just like shoot for the millennial age group, 18 to 30. And I think like for us, like I was not wanting that. I was kind of expecting it to be like hipster leaning young people like myself. But I was really pleasantly surprised that we have like a really strong contingent of church matriarchs, and we have a lot of kids running around too. And like, Thanksgiving dinner wouldn't be the same without grandma, and it wouldn't be the same without the kids table. And that's definitely what we have. The other thing too is like, speaking of like, having a diversity of, socioeconomic representation at churches. If your only fundraising model is built on passing the plate, you are putting a real limit on the people that you're inviting into your community. Like if you're expecting, families who can barely pay the bills to, help bankroll your church, I think that's really wrongheaded. Like, the story of the widow's mite. Have you guys ever looked at that recently? Can I start preaching a little bit? I think I'm gonna start preaching a little bit. That's usually talked about on Stewardship Sundays, right? People say like, look at this widow who gave the last penny that she had, and if we could have faith like hers and, give our pennies to the church, that's what the gospel is calling us to. But if you read like a few verses before, Jesus says like, woe to you, you devourers of widows' houses, who wear your long flowing robes and sit in your large stone buildings and destroy the poor underfoot, right? And then directly after that, you have an image of a widow giving her last penny. And like, guess what? Like a widow giving her last penny, that is not a church growth model. That is injustice. And so I think for me, I'm like much more interested in having like our fundraising models completely separate from the people who attend. And then whatever they can give, we'll use to help the disenfranchised in some way.
Preach.
Right.
You did. Well, and I think maybe there's a lot of reluctance around the economic structures that we have that really clearly delineate for-profit and nonprofit. I don't know. Have you gotten any pushback on the for-profit? I mean, I don't know how you guys are set up like with the IRS. That's not as much of what I'm interested in knowing, but the idea of making money through the church, like bringing in an income source, has that been an issue at all? Or I think it's an awesome idea, and I think you guys are onto something here. Obviously.
I think like if anything, that's the thing that kind of like gets people a little bit nervous, and like nobody wants to admit that they are like wrongheaded about money or like how they spend their money, and nobody wants to think their church is like spending money wrong. But I'll just like go out on a limb here and say like I think it is like economic sin that churches are spending millions of dollars to maintain the edifice of a church building when they could spend that money to help the poor. Like I think that is like absolutely wrong that we're doing that, and people in the world see us doing that, and they are disgusted by it, and we're blind to it because we're in it, and it feels really important for us to have a new steeple, but it's not. Like I don't want to like hurt people's feelings in saying that, but I think like we as a church have to like look ourselves really hard in the face and say like, what are we like actually doing? Like what are we actually spending our resources on? And if there's anything that's gotten pushback, it's been that side of our message, I think. But I think generally people know that is correct.
It's very true.
Okay, so what do you guys think is the future of church? Like, where are we headed here? Because you're doing something radically different, so clearly you're making a break from the norm.
All right, so I think the future of the church is it's going to look drastically different than it looks now, which is like like a nothing statement. So I will explain what I'm saying. I think like denominations, Protestant denominations are going to be like no more within the next like 50 years or so. The Methodist Church, if we continue the rate of spending that we have with the rate of decline that we have, our death date is 2050. And nobody's talking about that. And that's really scary to me. I think like individual congregations are going to continue to decline, and then they're going to merge with like whatever the largest church in each individual town is. And eventually there will be like much fewer churches with much fewer, the church is going to be increasingly irrelevant to an increasingly larger amount of people. And I think like churches are going to be about much smaller, intimate relationships. I think like dinner church is like not a phenomenon that is like unique to us. Like there are other dinner churches that have kind of popped up independently of each other and look like hauntingly similar to one another. And I see that as a sign that that's one direction that people are finding like authentic community. The other thing that people are finding authentic community in is like CrossFit and yoga and, pubs and coffee shops. And, people find community. Like people aren't any less connected to communities than they ever have been. I think I think that's actually like an incorrect thing that people are saying. Just because they're not in your church doesn't mean they're not connected to communities. Like each of us has communities, just we're not finding it in churches anymore. And I think like people are going to continue to be like creative and like find new ways to express communities. And I think like churches are changing just like everything else is changing. I mean, like the music industry is changing, radio is changing, movies are changing, and people are having to find new ways to express themselves in those mediums that don't fit in the way that like they were structured traditionally. But that doesn't mean that people like, just because the music industry is dying doesn't mean that people are going to stop making music, right? So I think like people will always find ways to make music. Like music will never die. In the same way, I don't think the gospel will ever die. I think like organized Protestant churches are most likely going to be kaput within the next like 100 years in America, but people will still find ways to find the gospel and express the gospel.
And I think jumping off of that too, I can't help but think theologically about what we're going through, just because school ended, 2 months ago, but I'm still in that mode. Something has to die in order to be resurrected. And so I've begun to realize the importance and the beauty of resurrection. Like you need to die in order to be resurrected. And so for the institutional church, we've tried to patch problems for a very long time. We've tried, to increase membership in different ways. We've tried to change up our models. We've tried to do so many different things that ultimately have not been effective. And we're seeing the results of that in our numbers. And I think that one of the important things to remember is that after death, there is something. I mean, that's the core of one of the cores of Christian theology, is that there is an afterlife, and it's going to look nothing like what life right now looks like. And so when I think about simple church, when I hear about other models of church, I begin to realize that this is the resurrection. Like things have died. And I'm thinking about North Grafton United Methodist Church's story, how they closed their doors and they decided to invest in their future in a very different way. And that sort of resurrection can be rare, but I think it's becoming more and more evident these days. And it's a beautiful thing. But Zach, I have to laugh, because when you were describing that, I was like, well, geez, you're kind of making this sound apocalyptic.
Yeah, that's where my mind went too.
Yeah.
Well, I think that exactly the problem is that it is apocalyptic. Like the house is on fire and nobody's running for the exits.
Yeah, churches are closing by the droves, and like pastors are leaving the ministry by the droves, like thousands and thousands every year.
Are hemorrhaging. And there are only 2 pastors under the age of 40 in New England in the United Methodist Church. 2, right? That's me and one other person. And so like there's also like no mystery to the fact that if you don't bring in new young ministers into the fold, like eventually we're going to have a ministry crisis in the next 20 years, because all of our ministers are going to be retired. More than half of our ministers are within 10 years of retirement age. There are like major institutional problems that have to do mostly with money, but not only with money. There are major institutional problems that have to do with like, bringing in new life and people who are like willing to take risks. But also we just have to like, I think like we have to like create a ministry culture where ministers are able to and expected to spend like more than half of their time out in the community, meeting new people and inviting them into the church. Like, I think without that, we're not going to grow, and we're kind of like digging a hole for ourselves.
And I think too, Zach, you just mentioned inviting people into the church. I think too, in our model of ministry, we're inviting people out from the church to the world to really dig your hands into the community and engage in new and life-giving ways. I feel like so often we just want to get butts in pews. Where's the sending forth? And so I think that one of the things that the new church, whatever is resurrected out of this apocalyptic vision, will be so focused on dealing with social issues, economic divides, equality issues, racism, I think we will be so close to the front lines that we're going to encounter reality in a very new and different way. And I'm excited, but terrified. It's a beautiful thing that will happen.
Way to end it on hope, Christy.
I try.
You resurrected that one. No, seriously, the way that all comes full circle is good. And I think looking forward, not, overcoming that fear that a lot of people are feeling and not wanting to face, it's not the end of the story. It's not. Well, that's awesome.
I feel like there's a million more things, but we're kind of getting to the end of our time. So how can people find out more about what you're doing and maybe even be inspired to do something along those lines where they're at?
All right. So go to simpleumc.org. So that's simple UMC, like United Methodist Church.org. And you can find out about us. Shoot me an email if you want. You can like us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/simpleumc. We are on Instagram. You can find us through our website, look at our pretty pictures of bread, and stay in touch. I think the most important thing to do is to know where your food comes from, know who made it, and know that in order for you to eat, something had to die, whether it's a plant or whether it's an animal. And I think the most important thing that we can do is restore that sacred relationship where we are giving thanks for the death that had to happen so that we could live, and treating those plants and those animals and the people who produce those plants and animals and the earth that provides those plants and animals with the due respect and honor that they deserve. And I think that if you could do that, that's a revolutionary thing. And if you can do it around a table with people that you love or people that you disagree with, that is an even more revolutionary thing. And every one of us can do it. And it's not beyond our ability to do. And it's cheap. And it doesn't cost a lot. And you don't need to raise $1 million to do it. Anybody can do it. Also, you can come out and see us in Grafton if you want to actually get your hands on dough or your knees in the dirt. Come on and we'll put you to work. So give me a call. My number's on the website.
I want to go.
Come on.
All right.
Mona, you're too close not to.
I will. Yeah, I'll hop up there. You sold me.
I'll give you a free loaf of bread.
What? Okay, I'm definitely got to go now.
There, now you got to go.
Now I got to go.
Jeff,
right.
Jeff, you too.
I will travel across country and make it.
This has been a delight, you guys. Thank you so
absolutely.
much. I feel inspired.
And we'll make sure to put all your information in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can get all the information that we just talked about at irenicast.com/70. And as usual, for any questions, comments, concerns for the show in general, you can always contact us at irenicast.com/feedback. Yeah. So again, thank you. Thank you two so much for coming on and sharing more about that church model. And I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to different church models because I feel like most of the ones that I've worked under don't work very well. So I'm real excited and inspired by the model that you guys are setting forth, and it's really great.
Keep up the good work, please.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you both, Zach and Christy.
Adios.
All right. Cheers.